Okay, so for the week 10 code discussion challenge, which it's taken me a little while to articulate what these are, so I appreciate the patience. And in this case, I've named this update functions. Should be updating functions, but yeah, that works. So take your week 10 private, create your week 10 public, and so copy it from one to the other, and then push your code with setup done. Alright, so now what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to go over the arrow functions. I'll kind of like what I did in the code along. I'll walk you through how to write them in the main, and then your task for this one will be to do the rest of the modules, rewriting your traditional named functions into arrow functions. And in these two, you're going to, because we've done this in, or at least I've shown you this in the code along, so you're going to determine at least two functions where you could use or set a default value when calling the function, and then you would update the parameters. And the other one is determine at least one function where you can implement the REST operator. Okay, and then utilize that operator inside. So you have to, in these two cases, rewrite some of that. Actually, in this one, it'll be minor because all you're doing is setting that value. The key is just knowing how to implement it. Okay, so test your output. Make sure you're there, right? And then once you've attempted it, right, week 10, my attempt before your review. And as you see, I've been putting this since week 7. Right? Reply, if you find it a bit challenging, then it's fine. Reply saying what you think needs to be done, but you need help. And if you're not getting help, again, that's usually because it's the night. Then review the attendance for the solution, code it up, and then come back here and tell us what you learned from that process. Okay, so I have my VS Code up, and I'm going to go to my main. And at the end of the code up, we were looking at the rest. And again, this was my bad. Actually, I'm going to do this. I'm going to copy this up to here. I'm going to call this rest. And it's actually a rest operator. Okay. And the reason I'm going to do that is I'm going to copy this, right? Get rid of this. Paste it there. Now, because we have constant here, I'm going to comment out those, right? And this is going to become our arrow function. Okay, so first thing we'll do is just take it back to a regular function. Okay, take away the rest part of it. Okay, just send 100 to it. And then this is just like our regular functions that we've been this week now have seen by adding declaring names, right, on them. A better practice. Okay, so what do we do? And let's just flip over because I do have the arrow function page open. An arrow function is a function expression that's a compact alternative to the traditional function expression with some differences. But for what we're doing, I think there might be one student in here using this because they're actually using classes, I believe. But for almost everyone, we're not implementing this, although we are going to revisit objects, I believe, next week. But for our cases, really, there's really no reason not to use them. Okay? Really not use constructors. And I'll show you the syntax, and I think their first example is not a good one because this is a higher level, higher order function. That's actually something in that video I gave you they talked about, and this is something we haven't looked at, but it's basically a map, and it loops over the array. It's got just this arrow function that will be the function definition. And then for every item in there, every material, it'll just say, right, look at the length. In this case, notice there's not a return, there's not curly brackets. So it's like, I think it's a bad example. But it's okay, because generally by the time people get here, they have maybe had some experience with higher order functions. But really, just from a syntax perspective, this is what the arrow function looks like. And we can actually take off the parentheses, right? And if we only have one statement, we can just have that one statement without a return, without curly brackets. So in that sense, it looks different, but for what it's doing, it's pretty much the same. So let's come back over here now, right? So here's basically, and this is why, honestly, when I had you do this update this week, I was preparing for this because I knew once we had done that step, and it's good just to get experience with writing it, but we just get rid of, in this case, the function, and now after what we're passing in, the parameter equals our arrow. So this is not like when we were doing less than or greater than or anything like that. This is actually, I think it maybe turned a symbol, but in this case, right, this is just, and notice, even as I roll over it, VS Code says it's a function. Just looks different, right? So just the way it is, let's go ahead and just make sure it still runs. I'll set the breakpoint, right? We'll step into it. Passing A. Oh, right, at this point it's just defined. We haven't executed the line yet. So now A is 100. Now we're going to return, and then the result will be there. Okay? Cool, 102. So just to make it even more concise, which is the goal, there's a couple things we can do. If your function, in this case when you're writing an arrow function, you can't do this with a regular traditional function. But with an arrow function, if you only have one expression, and that's what this is an expression, okay? This is an expression. If you only have one expression, and in this case you want to return, but even if you don't want the return value, it'll by default return the value. And you can get rid of the curly brackets, okay? So we can get rid of the curly brackets. And we can get rid of the return. And then it's just one line. And again, that's the most concise well, actually, there's another step we could do here. But again, only if we have this, you can only do this if you have one expression, and none of our functions do. But I just want you to know, if when you're writing code, if you're writing functions, that you can just do that if you only have one expression, and by default it will return to whatever it called, right? So in this case, and let's just run it now. Okay, let's get the new code. Okay, so there we go. Call it, right? So there we go. We're passing it in. We're passing in 100. It returns it. Boom, 102. And the thing about these are as well, one of the things I don't necessarily like about them is that when you're running DevTools, you can't quite see the detail you can when you're writing regular functions. So, but again, I think this is more related to the return and not having the curly brackets on there. Okay, so the other thing you can do is you can drop the parentheses completely. If in this case you only have one thing you're passing in. You can't do this if you have multiple things. Like, so if you had, and we would have to accommodate another, right? You can't do, I believe you can't, let me make sure of that. I'm probably, yeah, comma. Yeah, so you can't do, and look at it, it already tells us we can't do that, okay? Now, because if we were to do that, we'd have to put the parentheses around it. Okay, so that's your arrow function. That's really as much as you need to know. So let's actually rewrite together, starting at the top. And here's all I have to do. I have to get rid of the function and put an arrow function. That's it. Now you get to decide for yourself which of these functions you like to write. Now here's an example where we only have one thing passed in, so we could get rid of the parentheses. Okay, and now here's that callback function that I was saying, the synonymous function, but even it is very easy to do. In this case, get rid of the function, go after the parameter, put that. And in this case, now in this case, are we using the E? And we are. Okay, if we didn't, if we didn't need the E, then we would just keep it like that. But in our case, we do. Okay. Okay. So let's just make sure everything runs as expected. See if it doesn't throw any errors for us. Okay, make sure our code is running. Good, it is. It is. And then we'll hit delete. Good. And edit. Good. And everything looks great. Okay. Okay. So like I showed you, so the other thing you're going to do is work on, how to set default values. I think I already deleted that code. Well, you can refer back to the code long to see those default values. And then here is an example of the REST operator. On the REST operator, if you had two parameters, like you had x, comma here, you can only do this spread operator on the last one, right? If you're using the spread operator for everything, then of course you could do that. But if you still wanted to have another one, it'd have to be the last one, okay? And that's just a rule based on the REST operator. Okay. Okay, so just going back here, right? So that's what you want to do. Again, we've already seen examples of these two. Refer to the documentation or the other video where we talked more about this. Make sure you test your code. And once you attempted it, right? My attempt before I review other students' code. And if you find it a bit of a challenge, remember I'm adding this after week 7. Reply telling what you think needs to be done, but you need help, right? I should say you need help. And if you're not getting help, again, because it's probably the night it's due and maybe later, you can review the solution video, code up the solution, and update your post here for what you've learned from the coding solution. Okay, I hope this one is fun, something that we're just increasing our things that we know how to do. And so now I'll go do attendance, where I'll talk about your step 2 for your dev work. See you later.